Hey there everybody, it's markcrilley. I'm back with another video. This is number 30 in my ongoing series of videos about how to create comics or manga. I'm going to put a link in the description to that playlist, giving you all my best advice. Today we're going to be talking about titles, coming up with titles, and of course that extends well beyond comics to any kind of story that needs a title. I'm going to be giving you all my best advice on the topic. Let's not waste any time. Let's go ahead and get into it. My first one is this. In addition to the meaning of the words, pay attention to their sound, their rhythm, and the feeling they convey. I took a class in poetry when I was in college, and I really do credit that with giving me a sense of, the sound of words and whether they flow nicely together. Probably the best example out of all my various creations is this one, Brody's Ghost. Some of you have maybe heard me talk about this, so I'll keep it short, but I knew I had a ghost in the story, and so I needed a name that had an O sound in it, Brody's Ghost, so that there would be that repetition of sound. Basically, I think people do get, naturally enough, get hung up on the meaning of words. They sometimes forget to pay attention to the sound, the feeling of the word, and that is really paramount in coming up with a title. You want something that flows nicely, that doesn't sound clunky, or generally speaking, you want something like that. It's your first impression that you can make on the reader, the prospective reader, I guess you'd say, is the title. So you do want to make sure that you are giving them a good feeling about your story by way of the title, rather than if you do, burden yourself with some clunky title, you're making a bad first impression and possibly not gathering as many readers as you could get. But we'll be talking more about that later. Let's move on now to number 2. Most creators prefer a short title. Long titles are usually wordy on purpose, seeking to achieve a certain effect. This one was sort of interesting. The whole topic, I must say, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it's interesting, this topic of titles. I didn't think I was going to be able to come up with many things to say, but very quickly I came up with 10 different bullet points on this topic. The length of the title is interesting. I'd say the trend these days is towards shorter titles. It makes them sort of more punchy. Maybe the ultimate example is the movie Up, right? Just 2 letters, the super short word. They clearly liked the idea of getting your attention with the simplicity of this starkly simple, super short word. And you can find plenty of examples in movies and books and so forth of just one word to kind of grab your attention. What do they say? Less is more. I think that's a good example of the power of using fewer words rather than more. But as I said, sometimes people do deliberately create a sort of wordy title on purpose, trying to get a certain effect. And I think for me, maybe the best example of that is this children's book. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. All right, a deliberately long title, a title that almost kind of dares you to memorize it because it has so many words in it. But interestingly, that title goes back to my initial point about the sound of the words, because there's a lot of method to the madness in that title. Terrible, horrible, both of those words, the second half of each word is almost identical, so there's a kind of rhythm there. And then no good, very bad. We're used to having good and bad as the sort of echoes of one another, so it's really a very highly organized title, and I think that helps people in memorizing it and sort of responding positively to it. For me, the ultimate example of a lengthy on purpose and kind of clunky on purpose, it seems to me, title is this movie called The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford. That one, I almost run out of breath by the time I get to the end of the title. And in a certain way, I wonder if the person who came up with that title was not, deliberately trying to break the rules of titles and saying, I'm not going to give some short, punchy, smooth-sounding title. I'm going to come up with something that's Sounds really clunky. You know, you get halfway through that. The assassination of Jesse James by the coward. You're like, when is this going to end? This is the longest title I've ever heard. But again, it's not, they didn't arrive at it by accident, I guess is my key point. It's a deliberate choice. They're trying to achieve a certain effect. Let's move on now to number 3. Most titles fall into one of two categories: straightforward descriptive or mysterious enigmatic. And I guess an example of a straightforward descriptive title would be Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? It's basically kind of describing the story to you. And, you know, before you go off hunting for a poetic or really fancy title, sometimes just the title that describes what happens in the story, you know, it's well worth considering, just keeping things simple that way. As an example of the sort of more mysterious and enigmatic title, as I thought about it, one of the most famous books ever written in America, Catcher in the Rye, is an example of a mysterious title. You cannot possibly understand the meaning of that title until you read the book. And those of you who have read The Catcher in the Rye will know what I'm talking about, that the whole title is a misunderstanding of a song lyric by the main character. And we've all gotten used to saying The Catcher in the Rye because it's so popular. But when it first came out, I think it's guaranteed nobody really knew, what does that mean? It's a mysterious title. And so that's your other type of title that you can come up with. You know, a one-word title movie that is a good example of this sort of mysterious is the movie Sideways. One of my favorite movies from recent years, but it's a little hard to say, why is this movie called Sideways? You know, and you're left kind of having to theorize what they mean by that. So I thought it was just at least worth considering before you even get started. What type of title do you prefer for the story that you're working on? Do you want something that just describes things? Let me think of another one that sort of describes things. There's a bunch of them. Well, like How to Train Your Dragon. That one just describes things. Even a movie like Rebel Without a Cause. It's kind of just putting it right out there, telling you what you're going to see when you watch that movie. So anyway, something to think about. I haven't talked about what I'm drawing here. I'm, you know, obviously just doing a drawing of a chibi doing a karate kick. It's for a book that I'm working on. I'm not ready to announce exactly what this book is about, but I wanted to get some work done, as I often do, while I do a video of this sort. And now I'm pulling out my Micron Pigma, or is it Pigma Micron? I can never remember the order to do the inking. Let's move on to the next one. Number 4, in the age of Google, there is added value in a never-used-before title or one with unique words in it. By which I mean, you know, when someone does a search on Google for something, for the title, there's a benefit to having your book be the only thing that shows up. I'll give you a sort of a negative example of that. The movie Australia, that came out within the last 5 or 10 years. Of course, when you Google the word Australia, the first thing that comes up is the movie, or not the movie, but the country, right? You're going to see the country Australia, naturally. That's what you would want to be the first thing to show up on Google. And if that movie is lucky, maybe they are the third or fourth thing that comes up. If you come up with a title that is a combination of words that has basically never been used as a title before, you have that benefit. If your title includes an invented word that doesn't exist until you came along, then you really definitely have a one-of-a-kind. For example, RoboCop. I don't think the word RoboCop existed as a word until that movie put it out there. So they had that benefit. Blade Runner, another example of a one-of-a-kind title that's not competing with anything because they invented it. But, even if you just have a sequence of words that no one else has used, you're in good shape for, like Brody's ghost. I didn't invent the word Brody, but I remember actually, to follow my own advice, I remember looking on Google to see if the name Brody and the word ghost had ever been combined. And back in those days, I still remember this, I would get links to a video of a comedian named Brody something or other, and he had a stand-up comedy routine that involved ghosts, right? That was the only thing that was showing up. And I thought, well, that's okay. I think I can quickly have my Brody's ghost become the #1 search thing if this is the only thing that I can find that's related to these two words. Anyway, something worth thinking about if indeed it matters to you to have your title show up first when people go searching on the internet. Let's move on to number 5, and this is the first of 2 different "that being said" comments, because I said here, there's value in a one-of-a-kind title. That being said, many great titles are nothing more than just a single word from the dictionary chosen because it feels right. And one that popped into my mind as an example of this is the movie Jaws. That is just a word from the dictionary, really. And it sounds menacing to us mainly because we have associated it with this film. But I think that's because of the movie that we think that the word Jaws sounds scary, and we start thinking of the theme music. Dun, dun, dun. But that's something that's an effect that they created. The word Jaws, a scientist could talk about comparing the jaws of different animals. That on its own did not necessarily convey that feeling of menace. But they understood by plucking this one word out of the dictionary and, giving it title status, that it would eventually take on a certain power. So sometimes, you'd just taking one word, that everyone is already familiar with, but plonking it down into the position of the title gives a certain power to it. And the key thing is, it feels right. You as the creator have just decided, this feels like this should be the title of my project. Let's move on now to number 6. Better to have a weird title than a boring one. Okay, now I want to stress that boring is not necessarily what you might first think of in this context. I think sometimes a boring title can be a sort of Hollywood generic sounding title. A few years back, there was this Tom Cruise movie called Edge of Tomorrow. And a lot of people said, boy, this title, it's trying to sound cool, but there's a certain bland aspect to it. We don't really know what it means, The Edge of Tomorrow. And the movie was really quite original. Those of you who saw it I would agree, I think, that it deserved a more distinctive title. And indeed, I think they re-released it with the title Live, Die, Repeat, which I would say fits into that category of one of a kind. You've never heard it before as a title. So that's an interesting example from the real world of what I would say is a somewhat generic title. And indeed, a weird title, if your story is good enough over time, eventually doesn't sound weird at all. An example of that would be, I think, A Clockwork Orange. Stanley Kubrick movie. I don't know if it was probably a book before then, I'm not sure, but quite an odd combination of words there. Clockwork Orange, what does this mean? Am I supposed to be able to understand that? But over time it becomes a natural sequence of words that is, no longer weird, just distinctive and memorable. So that is the first of this that being said combination, because number 7 begins, that being said, sometimes the simple title is the only one that works. And some of you might be saying, Crilly, you're giving us conflicting advice here. But, that's just, this is not science, this is art. And don't think of any of these as like rules and regulations. I was going to give as an example Toy Story. Some of you are maybe familiar with this, that they really tried to come up with they tried very hard to come up with alternative titles, some of which are just kind of laughably trying too hard. And eventually they had to just give in and say, let's just call it Toy Story. And that is, just describing, here it is, the story about these toys, And over time that one has come to be a great title. Even though the people who made the movie, maybe thought that they were settling for something that's not particularly distinctive because they just kept, they racked their brains and they couldn't come up with anything better. Sometimes the simple title does end up being the best one. Let's move on here to number 8. If you're hoping to turn your story into a series, consider a 2-part title, the series title plus the subtitle. Let me go ahead and grab one of my books that's an example of this, and that is my first series from Random House, Akiko, the Akiko series. Some people don't realize that I did this series, and they're like, oh, hey, Blast from the Past, I remember that. But the title, the name of the character is the title of the series, and then there's the subtitles. Pieces of Gax was the subtitle of this particular book, and you see them doing that in movies all the time. Avengers, Age of Ultron, right? See, if you present your first book that way, then it becomes... it establishes the idea of it being a series, and you have created a pattern that allows you very easily to move on to a book 2. Another one of my series, Billy Click, Creech Battler. This one tried again, using the name of the main character to be the series name, and then followed by the title of the particular book, the subtitle. Hang on to that one because I'm going to be bringing that back as an example of something else later in this video. But the 2-part title, sometimes that can become a little bit silly, and I would say just in general, you can look at a list of books or a list of movie titles and start to analyze the structure of them and use that as the fundamental structure of your title. For example, Alice in Wonderland, that is a classic title that consists of the name of the main character and then the location of the story. I sort of patterned my first Akiko book title off of that, Akiko on the Planet Smoo. I took the Alice part and changed it to Akiko. I took the In Wonderland part and changed it to The Planet Smoo. So studying different pre-existing titles, and you're not going to borrow the actual words, but you can borrow the structure and build your title accordingly. I'm a big believer in learning from the masters. If there's any cool titles out there that you love, study them. What is it that makes them sound cool? And indeed, some things can be a negative example. If there's a title that you hate, pause for a moment to consider, what is it that I hate about this title? And let's make sure that I don't do that in the title of my series. All right, we're getting closer to the end of my list of different bits of advice. Oh, here we go, actually. I'm going to come back to Billy Click already. Fair warning, if you land a publishing deal, you may be pressured to change the title. And indeed, Billy Click is the ultimate example of that for me. When I first came up with this character, he was going to be called Billy Brainer. And the publisher did not like the idea of brains being, the brainy, nerdy, geeky character being the main thing in the title, and they said, can we change this name, because we don't want him to be called Brainer. And at that stage in my career, I was a little nervous about, hanging on to this publishing deal, so instead of being a prima donna and saying, no, his name is Billy Brainerd. I sort of folded and said, okay, all right, here, I'll give you some other names. And so I remembered a guy from college named Bayard Bugby, and I always thought he had a cool name. Again, that sort of flow of words, Bayard Bugby. And so I thought, let's call him Billy Bugby. And they said, okay, yeah, that works. And we got well through the process. And then they came back again. And they said, we don't like Bugby. It's not cool sounding. Can you make it cooler sounding? And that's when I went back and came up with Billy Click. All of this as a way of warning you that publishers feel very strongly about the title, and they might sort of take possession of it a little bit and say, look, we can't publish this book until the marketing people are happy with the title, because their job is to go out and sell this thing. And of course, you always have the option to stand strong and say, no, absolutely, I cannot change this. And part of me wonders if I shouldn't have been a little tougher on that one and stood my ground. But when you got a family to feed and you're nervous about remaining in print, sometimes you don't have the luxury of sticking to your guns, and you become a little more pliant and say, oh, okay, all right, whatever you say, boss. I thought it was worthwhile sharing that story for those of you who have not yet become published, just in case it happens to you someday, and you can say, oh yeah, I remember when Crilley warned me about this. They get awfully possessive about the title. Also, the cover art. That's a topic for another video. But the publisher may give you a free hand for your story, for the interior, but the title and the cover art are two things where they may come in and want to start getting under the hood a little. And you might even accuse them of micromanaging, but they've invested a lot of money in this project, and they're determined to get those two things just right from their point of view, so as to launch the book in the best way possible. Let's move on now to the final piece of advice, number 10. The title is not as important as many believe. A great story will overcome a bad title. A great title cannot save a bad story. So yes, ironically, my last piece of advice is to tell you, don't sweat the title. Don't get too obsessed with, I gotta have the perfect title. As we said, Toy Story, sometimes just a simple title is all you need. And I do think that, maybe as an example of, I wouldn't say this is a bad title, but a somewhat misleading title. There was a movie back when I was in high school called Kiss of the Spider Woman. I wonder if anyone has seen it. A very misleading title, it has to be said. It sounds like some kind of almost comic book movie, The Kiss of the Spider Woman. But it's actually a drama, a prison drama, very gritty, very realistic. And anyone who thinks that they're going to see a movie about the kiss of the Spider Woman is going to be sorely disappointed, because that's not what that movie's about. Well, in the end, it doesn't matter, because it was a great movie with great acting, and it sort of overcame the challenges of that title. Again, I'm not saying that was a bad title, but some people may have griped a little to say, boy, this title is, when I tell my friends the title of this movie, I have to follow it up by saying, it's not what it sounds like, okay? It's not that way, and certain titles become that way. I, for one, would not want to keep having that conversation, saying, no, it's not what it sounds like, But anyway, I wanted to use that as an example of, a really great story will overcome its title. So don't think that the title is the make or break thing. The really important thing is the story itself and your writing. And that's really what you ought to be focusing on. How good are your storytelling abilities? Don't get too obsessed with coming up with the perfect title if you have indeed not put in the hard work of becoming a really good writer. So I think that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you found it useful. Let me go ahead and bring out my books. So as to thank anyone who has supported me by getting them, I'll leave out the books that I already mentioned throughout this video. Miki Falls, this is my graphic novel series. The Realism Challenge, my book about hyper-realistic illustrations. The Drawing Lesson, this actually is a lot like Toy Story, right? It just sort of is the simple, sometimes the simple story is the best you can, or the simple title is the best you can come up with. Mastering Manga 3, I'm pleased to say I came up with that title, and I fought for it, really, to convince them, and now I think it's hard to imagine that series with any other name. But let's go ahead and lay down this pen. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another one real soon.